Hey there, race fans. It's Race Day Top 5 with me, Frank 5. Texas, in the Lone Star State. Everything's bigger in Texas. And this weekend, to kick off the opening race of the round of 12, things were pretty big regarding drama and playoff chaos regarding some of our playoff drivers. At the end of the race, one of our 12 drivers in the playoffs punched his ticket to the round of 8 in a 3-wide pass late in the race. Let's get into all the way down at the Lone Star State. Number 1, William Byron. What a career year this guy is continuing to have as he captured his 6th win of the season, and he locks up the win at yesterday's Autotrader EchoPark Automotive 400 at Texas Motor Speedway, beating out Ross Chastain, Bubba Wallace, Christopher Bell, and Denny Hamlin for the victory. William Byron started the day in the middle of the pack in about the top 20 for the most part, and that's where he was hovering around for the early part of the race. Then they picked up some track position, and they got themselves in the top 10. Then they lost the track position because guys were in different strategies versus guys going longer stint versus guys deciding to come in and get those tires, thinking that fresh tires would benefit them versus other drivers, but track position kind of really mattered for most of the day. Byron just stayed around the top 10, top 15 for a good majority of the middle of the race, and then towards the end of the race, he found himself inside the top 10 late in the going and had a chance for a solid top 5 finish, but then there was some contenders that fell to the wayside due to some issues, and Byron continued to work his way up a few more positions on the racetrack. And then after the last caution of the race came out for a wreck on the front stretch, Byron found himself restarting on the inside lane in 3rd spot. While the 2 leaders up in front of him, Bubba Wallace and Chase Briscoe, were battling hard for the lead side by side off of 2 and kind of lost the momentum when they were running side by side. Byron got a big run off of turn 2 down the backstretch, carried the momentum past the 14 car, and just as Bubba was trying to come down and clear to the bottom lane, the 24 car was there, and Byron stuck his nose under there, and he was able to take the lead with the momentum he had and drove away with no issue whatsoever, did not look back at all, and captured his 6th win of the season, and more importantly, locking himself into the round of 8. This race was critical for someone like William Byron, a playoff driver, because the next 2 races are the ultimate wild cards of this round, Talladega and the Charlotte Roval. You wanted to win this race yesterday just so you could avoid the pressure of having to try to win at Dega or the Roval and survive. And the 24 team did what they needed to do, and Byron got the victory yesterday. Not only did he get a 6th win of the season, but yesterday was a milestone victory for the team Hendrick Motorsports as they captured their 300th win as a Cup Series team. It's unbelievable the journey that they've been on since they started in the early 80s. And there was a point where this team that was called then All-Star Racing was going to shut down the middle of the season. Mr. H didn't make the trip to Martinsville Speedway. He declined and decided to just go to church with the family. And then he got the call from his mom, who was watching the race or listening to it on the radio, and said, "Rick, we just won our first race." And Rick said, "What? We won a race?" It started off with the win, and that day at Martinsville with Jeffrey Bodine winning. And ever since then, they have been on a wonderful journey as a race team with the wins that they've accumulated in the championships, winning races with guys like Bodine, Kenny Schrader, Darrell Waltrip, Terry Labonte, of course, Jeff Gordon, Jimmy Johnson. Kyle Busch was with them for a brief period of time as well, and of course now with recent drivers like Alex Bowman, Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott, and William Byron. Hendrick Motorsports has been quite one of those super teams in NASCAR over the last couple of decades. They've been a great team, and that's why they're still one of the top dogs when it comes to trying to battle for race wins and championships. And they get to punch their ticket to the next round with the 24 team of Byron with that victory. So great job by the 24 and William Byron yesterday on the victory. Number 2, Bubba, a career day, but falls short. Well, he openly admitted he choked. Starting off of the day, Bubba Wallace, who came into the playoffs after barely getting in after last weekend's race at Bristol by getting 19 more points than the competition after he entered the day below the cutoff line. He gained 19 points after last weekend's race and got himself into the round of 12. And to kick off the race this weekend, he started on the pole, his 2nd career pole. The last time he won a pole was at Michigan last year, where he ended up finishing 2nd to Kevin Harvick. In this race, Bubba Wallace was strong all day long. They had a great car out front, and they ran in the top 5, top 10 pretty much the entire race. They had the speed and the track position to stay up there. It looked like for a moment that Bubba was going to be able to win the race, even though he had a close call with one of the other contenders of the race, Kyle Larson, through 1 and 2 when the 5 car got loose underneath of him and went around. Bubba was able to hold on to the lead, but I was concerned about him because when he went up high to avoid the 5 car, he got up in that upper groove where there's literally no grip out there and a lot of marbles out there, and I felt like it was going to hurt him on the restart if he didn't cool his tires. Well, he did, and he was able to get a good restart. It looked like the race was his until we had that wreck on the front stretch. And then he took the outside lane for the final restart, which he did the last couple of restarts and got good launches. But this one, he didn't really get the best launch, and that's why the 14 of Chase Briscoe stayed with him, and Bubba wasn't able to carry enough momentum off of 2 to get a little bit of a gap versus everybody else behind him. That's why Byron got such a big run through 1 and 2 down the back straightaway and heading off into 3 to get by the 23 of Bubba. He tried to come down and clear him, but it wasn't enough. The 24 was there, and Bubba had to slip back and fall back to 3rd spot. Now, it's a great point stay when you look at it, although he is 2 below the cutoff line heading into Talladega, track where he's won at before. But Bubba openly admitted, and it's just something that I think he's got to stop being a little too hard on himself. He always seems to be hard on himself whenever the call to being up at the front and try to get the best finish possible. I mean, yes, he's racing for the win. I understand that, but you got to look at the positives. You had a great day versus a lot of other playoff drivers, which I'm going to get into. But Bubba is still very hard on himself because he expects more from himself. And he openly admitted, I choked at the end of the race yesterday. I should have taken the bottom lane because they said that the 14 car is too tight on the outside if he restarted up there. And Bubba's like, I should have done it. I should have taken the bottom, but I didn't. And, you know, that could be something that comes back to haunt him if he ends up having 2 rough races next weekend. I mean, don't get me wrong. Again, Bubba had a great result, and he's got himself in a relatively good points position to try to make it into the round of 8. Maybe with a win next weekend, that can all go away. But I think was a little hard on him. He's obviously hard on himself, but I think he's being a little too hard on himself because you got to, again, look at the positives. You had a great car all day long. You ran up at the front. You led the most laps. You have nothing to be ashamed of for finishing in the 3rd spot. You had a great run. They got to take this momentum, and they got to carry over the next 2 races, and hopefully they could find themselves into the round of 8 with the less amount of bonus points than everybody else has around him. So we'll see what happens, but Bubba Wallace and the 23 team did a great job yesterday, but unfortunately they fell short. Number 3, Larson, fast and strong, but wrecks out late. Kyle Larson, other than Bubba Wallace, I think, was the car to beat yesterday. When that car got in the clean air, he'd open up to 5-6 second gaps ahead of 2nd place. That's how good that 5 car was yesterday. He was a rocket ship, especially when you get out of that dirty air and you find yourself in the clean air with not just good handling race car, but fresh tires as well. That's where Larson excelled yesterday, out front in the clean air. But then on the late race restarts where Bubba Wallace and him were battling side by side, it looked like that Larson was trying to hold the bottom in the middle of 1 and 2, but then the car drifted up the track on the inside of Bubba, and the 5 went around and backed into the outside wall, ultimately taking him out of the race. And it looked like it was going to be him that was going to get Rick Hendrick his 300th win as a car owner, but unfortunately didn't materialize. At least the 24 got the victory for the team, but Larson, I think, really wished he could have had that restart back and made a better decision about how he ran 1 and 2 versus being on the inside of the 23 car of Bubba Wallace. And ultimately, the wreck knocked him out of the race. He now finds himself 2 points above the cutoff line. And the next 2 tracks, Talladega, again, it's not his strong suit, and super speedways have never been his strong suit. But then we go to the Roval. Now, he won there 2 years ago, but if you remember last year, he had a mechanical issue late in the race that pretty much took him out of contention to advance to the round of 8. And plus, Christopher Bell winning immediately eliminated Larson from the round of 8. So the 5 teams got to put together solid runs and get a lot of stage points these next 2 races. They're going to have a shot to advance. I feel like they had the chance yesterday, and unfortunately, the incident getting loose on the inside of the 23 and hitting the outside wall ultimately took him out of it. But 5 team had the speed, they had the car, they just didn't have the luck at the very end of the race. Number 4, Chastain to 2nd place. Where did he come from? Because early in the race, Ross Chastain, good race car, running top 10, seemed to have the speed to keep up with those guys. But in the middle of the race, when everybody was making their pit stop, I think it was at the end of stage 2 and before we started the final stage, the one car got an anti-stall on pit road where they couldn't get going, and he lost a lot of spots and restarted in the 29th spot. Worked his way up to 22nd, then got high, fell all the way back, and had to do it again and again and again. But ultimately, a lot of cautions changed the outcome of the race, and he was one of those cars that was able to stay out and get track position, and he was one of the few cars that was able to hold off those other cars that had pitted late in the going on fresh tires and worked its way all the way up to second spot. And I'm thinking, if the 24 and the 23 somehow tangle for the victory, the one car has a shot for this win. But the 24 was just too strong. The one got the momentum in the inside of 1 and 2 and passed the 23 car. Tried his best to run down the 24, but just couldn't do it. But this is great for the one team in Trackhouse. They have had a down year, shall we say. Even though they made the playoffs with Ross Chastain with the win at Nashville, it still hasn't been the year that they had a year ago. And now, granted, they've toned down the drama just a little bit despite some early season collisions. He's still an aggressive driver, but I think he's also kind of toned down how he races everybody else on the racetrack, even though his aggressiveness is kind of entertaining to watch as long as it doesn't irritate everybody else that he's racing against. He used consistent, smooth passes and had a good race car at the end of the day to get himself up there in the top 5 and have himself a second place finish. And he's only a couple points above the cutoff line, which is good, but you obviously need 2 good races these next 2 events to have a chance to make it to the round of 8 if you're going to have a shot to get back to the championship 4 like you did a year ago, even though you're not going to be able to use the melon move anymore because that's officially outlawed in NASCAR. But a great performance by the one team in Chastain yesterday after a pretty average but consistent first round. The second round so far, off to a great start for that one team. At number 5, chaos for our playoff drivers. There are some drivers that I mentioned that fared well, then there were others that didn't. I've already talked about Kyle Larson because it's one of the storylines that he was one of the best cars and had the incident late in the race, while other playoff drivers had their own fair share of incidents yesterday. Starting off with Kyle Busch, a guy that I predicted ever since he joined RCR and started being consistent over the year to make it to the championship 4. And would not be shocked if he made it. Well, he's in the position where he may not make it because yesterday, in the later laps of the first stage, Kyle Busch made contact with the wall briefly after rating on his team a couple laps ago. I might have a flat tire. I have to probably come in and pit. But he didn't. He still was running competitive times versus the leaders. But then going into turn 1 with about 8 to go in the stage, the rear tire goes down and he backs in the outside wall and finishes in the 35th spot. One spot ahead of his teammate who wrecked earlier, but he had the wheel lug come off and the wheel come off because they didn't tighten it up. So a rough day for the Richard Childress organization, and now Kyle finds himself 17 points below the cutoff line heading into Talladega. Now, the good thing is he won there earlier this year, but that might not be the same when he gets back there next weekend. Then we go to Denny Hamlin, his former teammate who was coming in with one of the most bonus points other than Byron and Martin Truex Jr. Hamlin leaving the pits at the end of the beginning of stage 2, gets doored by his teammate Ty Gibbs, as Gibbs had just left a couple pits behind Denny Hamlin and just a few seconds early. Gibbs comes in and doors the 11 of Denny Hamlin in the right side door, but thankfully Hamlin was able to continue throughout the rest of the race. Gibbs wasn't so fortunate. He had to retire from damage, but Hamlin stayed within the top 5, top 10 the majority of the race. But I think the damage to the door hurt the aero a little bit and cost them a chance to run with Larson and Bubba and Byron at the very end of the race. Even though they took tires late and got themselves a 5th place finish, you could have wondered what could have happened if he didn't get that damage in the door from his teammate. But at least they got a top 5 at the very least. And finally, Ryan Blaney, who was kind of average for most of the day, but stayed within the top 5 for portions of the race, particularly stage 2, and got some much-needed stage points. It looked like he was going to be in a position late in the race to hang on for a top 5, top 10 result and have himself a nice points cushion heading into Talladega. But all that changed after caution came out with about 50 laps to go, and Ryan Blaney got caught for speeding, and he got pinned in the middle of the traffic and never recovered. And he was a part of that late race incident, the last caution of the race, where he and a couple of cars were trying to, they were trying to avoid what was going on in front. It was more of an accordion effect because when 45 of Tyler Reddick hit the outside wall off of 4, a couple cars behind him did the same thing, and it started turning into a big wreck on the front stretch that collected the 12th car of Ryan Blaney, who unfortunately should have finished in the top 10 if it wasn't for that speeding penalty. But unfortunately, we'll never know. But a rough day for the 12th team. Now they find themselves 11 points below the cutoff line. So a rough day for some of those playoff drivers that we thought were going to be really strong yesterday. They didn't have the luck go for them at the very least. And also this weekend, I would like to say a big shout out to NASCAR and everybody for honoring Sherry Pollux, who, as we all know, passed away last Sunday due to her long battle with ovarian cancer. Every single race team this weekend carried a special ovarian cancer sticker on their cars to honor Sherry and the impact that she made on the sport. And I thank everybody for honoring her and what she did, and we truly do miss her. And we will keep fighting just like she did. So race 1 of the round of 12 is officially in the books, and now we're off to a track next weekend where you are going to need to survive, and play chess to win the game. And that is Talladega Superspeedway, the 2.66 mile track where they're all bunched up together racing at over 190 miles per hour, 2 wide, 3 wide, maybe sometimes 4 wide, and the action is going to get very intense late in the race. Now, in recent Talladega races, we've actually seen calm racing. We haven't seen a whole lot of big wrecks. We have seen some wrecks, but not massive 10, 12 car pileup wrecks, which is kind of a relief with this car for Talladega standards. Well, Daytona, when it comes to the 500 and the regular season finale, it can get a little antsy out there. So what will happen this upcoming weekend? Will Bubba Wallace replicate the win he had 2 years ago, even though it was rain shortened? Will he get his second win at this track? Will Kyle Larson be able to overcome what could have been a win yesterday and get Mr. H his 301st win next weekend at the Superspeedway? Or will NASCAR's most popular driver who won it a year ago, Chase Elliott, have some Talladega magic left in the tank and take it next weekend and spoil the rest of the drivers in the Drivers' Championship? We'll see. It'll be a very entertaining race on the high banks of Talladega in Sweet Home, Alabama, where the skies are so blue. Well, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week. Subscribe, like, and congrats to William Byron and the 24 team on their very impressive win at Texas yesterday. Have a great week, everybody. Let's go racing!